When travelling on the small yet congested C2C network, you usually expect to travel on one of these Class 357 Electrostar trains. However, what C2C never told you is that until the end of June 2022, it was also possible to travel on one of their Class 387 Electrostar trains, which were only used on one return service a day, and as such, spent most of their time on depot doing nothing, as can be seen here. So, join me as I take a look at these trains and see just how much of a difference these secret trains provided to the C2C network. So, without further ado, it's now time for us to get this show on the rails. Hello, and a very good evening from Fenchurch Street in central London, one of the smallest London termini, yet the most intensively operated. Today, I will be travelling with C2C, who also provide all of the services here today, on one of their Class 387 trains. The station dates back to 1841, although it was rebuilt in 1854, and serves as the main terminus of the London Tilbury and Southend Railway. Unlike the stationed external design, which is rather impressive, sadly, there isn't really that much to see or do here, although there is a Burger King to the left and a W.H. Smith upstairs to prepare you for your onward journey. Anyways, I am running relatively late as the train departs in a few minutes and I haven't picked up my tickets, so let's go. Right, tickets obtained, so let's get moving. I will be going throughout the specifics of the train more during the route, as there is only one evening departure each day. So for now, let's look at our route for today. We start from Fenchurch Street in central London and travel along the London Tilbury and Southend Railway through East London to our first stop of Limehouse. After which, we travel further along the route into East London and join up with the District and Hammersmith and City lines at West Ham. We then travel along further, skipping Barking and Upminster, as well as West Horndon, to reach our next stop of Leyden, and our first stop in the county of Essex. Following this, we then travel on to Benfleet, and then finally onto Leigh-on-Sea, Chalkwell, Westcliff, Southend Central, Southend East, Thorpe Bay, and finally Shoeburyness, with an expected arrival time of 1846. Right, there's only one thing to do, so let's get moving. Approximately 5 minutes later, we are now arriving into our first stop of Limehouse in East London, and as can be seen to the right, we are running parallel to the DLR network for this part of the trip. Limehouse station itself provides effective links with the DLR to places such as Canary Wharf, as can be seen in the background. You have to admit, it is a really impressive piece of scenery, just seeing all those buildings rising out of the middle of East London. The rise of Canary Wharf as a financial centre, as well as excellent links with lines such as the DLR and the Jubilee line, have caused chronic overcrowding on the route, which is what led C2C to ordering the new build Class 387-3 fleet in 2016, of which 6 were previously operated by the operator. To the right, the DLR station can be seen, as well as this part of the station being for C2C services only, who provide all the services along the route. Owing to the fact I was at the rear of this 12-carriage train, we did not get a good view of Limehouse until actually departing the station. On the approach to West Ham High Level, not only can we see the Jubilee line and the DLR platforms just below us, but to the right is the construction of the new station entrance for West Ham. The entrance, which is expected to provide a better link to the upcoming community hub, is expected to be open in 2023. It's worth noting as well that we run alongside the District and Hammersmith and City lines from this point onwards, with C2C services providing a fast link between West Ham and Upminster. However, this is our last stop in Greater London for the trip. The remainder of the stops are in Essex. Shortly after leaving West Ham, we find ourselves passing East Ham Depot, which is located just outside of Barking Station and is where C2C performs heavy maintenance on its Class 357 fleet. The C2C Class 387s were previously maintained here also, prior to their replacement in June 2022. Something which was proudly shown off by the units on their cab sides in the form of silver and golden Spanner Award stickers, which the depot won during the period which these units were in service. That being said, during their final period in service with C2C, they appeared to be principally maintained at Shoeburyness Carriage Servicing Depot, located just outside of our final terminus for today. Our unit today is 3 full carriage sets coupled together, which is something that can be highlighted around the curve into Barking Station. Just look at that length. Really impressive, don't you think? As the service we're on today is a rush hour service, we will not be stopping at every single station on the C2C network, as normal Shoeburyness diagrams tend to do. An example being here, where we pass Barking, a major interchange for the Gospel Oak to Barking line, as well as the C2C branch to Grays via Purfleet and Rainham, as can be seen to the right where a service is arriving into Barking from there. Anyways, I believe it's now time for a Know Your Seat, in order to get a look at the train and its features. As with most modern build units nowadays, these trains are fitted with the Fenchurch ironing board seats, which are notoriously known for being rather uncomfortable and, despite their ergonomic design, are not fit for purpose. Something which isn't that common on the C2C network is trains with foldable armrests, which these trains have. They have them on the end of the seat, as well as in the middle of the seat. Foldable trays can also be found at the back of the seat. There's also a groove which can be used to hold a bottle or a cup. Pretty handy if you ask me. Arguably one of the most important features of a train in the 21st century is the inclusion of power sockets, which these trains fortunately have. I would argue though that USB sockets are missing, but to be fair, considering the condition of C2C's other fleet, I'm willing to accept this. In common with other members of the Electrostar family, there are desk lights at the top of every seat, which can be handy if you're reading a book or you just want a bit of light. Next to the windows of the train are coat hangers for the storage of coats and bags, which does provide a good way for you to keep good monitoring of your personal belongings. This brings us into our last station on the C2C network that's within the Greater London boundary, Upminster, which is where you can change here for the District line, as well as for the Romford to Upminster line operated by London Overground. It's worth noting here as well that as we pass the station, the maximum speed on the C2C network is 75 miles an hour. This is despite the fact that the train we're on now is capable of 110 miles an hour, although this is limited by their pantographs to 100 miles an hour. Anyways, it's now time for us to continue our journey east and make our way into Essex. Approximately 20 minutes after leaving West Ham, we find ourselves approaching Leyden, a commuter town located in Essex. It's worth noting that the train emptied out here, making for a much quieter ambience when travelling along the rest of the C2C network. Being a limited stop service, we avoid many stops that would otherwise be key stations on the route. For example, the station we have just passed is Pitsea, which is where the Tilbury portion of the London Tilbury and Southend Railway links on to the final portion, which arrives into Southend. Not long after leaving Benfleet, our fourth intermediate stop of the route, we find ourselves approaching Leigh-on-Sea, which is where the coastal views of the London Tilbury and Southend Railway begin, and is my favourite part of the route. I would honestly recommend doing the coastal walk from Leigh-on-Sea station to Chalkwell, as it is absolutely spectacular. Not only do you get to see plenty of eateries and shops around the area, you also get to walk alongside both the railway and the coast, which, coupled with a beautiful day such as this, makes for a fantastic day out. The bridge we are just passing now is also a great photography spot. The coastal walk I mentioned earlier ends at Chalkwell, our next station call. After Chalkwell, we only have a mere 5 stations left until we arrive into our final stop of Shoeburyness. The station is located on a site next to the beach. Now that the train has emptied out, it's time for a walkthrough. We start at the rear of the train and then move onwards into our third carriage, which is where the universal accessible toilet is located, as well as the wheelchair space for those with reduced mobility, which is relatively spacious as with most Electrostars. Walking through the train again, we can see that our interior layout is 2+2, featuring tables, although this is completely different to the Class 357s which frequent the route. Eagle-eye viewers may have noticed the southern interior on the trains. This is because these trains were built as stock units back in 2016, and the 6 trains were leased to c2c, who at the time were suffering from chronic overcrowding. These were leased on a short-term basis pending delivery of their new Class 720 trains. Whilst you can open the interconnecting doors with a button, it's worth noting that there's a motion sensor located at the top of the door to open it with much ease. The door divider here is to distinguish standard class from first class, although there is no first class on c2c services, with this carriage instead being the dedicated quiet zone carriage for those who want a bit of silence. Despite the units having the capability to walk between them when running in multiple, this was not possible on this trip, as c2c seemed to have just completely locked them out of use. Before I head back to my seat, however, I'm going to check out the toilets, and as the accessible toilet is the closest one to my carriage, this seemed like the suitable candidate. Right, door locked, we can begin. Initial impressions, as expected, it is relatively clean considering how little these trains are used. And yeah, the water on the floor is just splashed back from the tap, so there's no need to worry. The soap is reasonably stocked and the tap is working relatively well, although I do not like the system which these toilets use, in that you have to use one to then follow on to the other. It's now time for me to check out the dryer, and that seems to be working perfectly fine as well, and does seem to be flowing rather fast. So, overall, the toilet gets a thumbs up from me. Right, now's the time to head back to my seat and complete my journey to Shoeburyness. Having now arrived back at my seat, we are now approaching Southend Central, the principal station serving Southend-on-Sea in Essex, which recently gained city status in 2021. Greater Anglia also provides services to the city from Liverpool Street to Southend Victoria, although I do find that c2c services are cheaper and run generally faster than Greater Anglia's. Right, conclusions. Overall, I would have to say that the c2c 387 fleet has had to be some of the most clean and immaculate units that I've ever travelled on, although this is taking into account the fact that they are only used on one return service a day, back when they were with the operator until June 2022. My only criticism of the units is that they have ironing board seats fitted, although it's worth noting that on the routes they previously operated, these are perfectly suitable. So, I bet you're wondering, what exactly happened to these trains and why do I class them as a secret fleet? Well, the first 3 of the 6 units left c2c in 2021 when they were, quote, loaned to GWR to help them during the IET crisis, although this ended up with them having leased them for an entire year. After this, in June 2022, the C2C and GWR Class 387-3 units both moved to Great Northern for use on express services between London and Cambridge and King's Lynn. And the reason as to why I call these trains a secret fleet is threefold. The first being that the fleet was just completely forgotten about by C2C's social media team at the time of recording, and as such they were telling customers that they had just completely gone out of service, which was not exactly true. The second of which being that they were only used a couple of times a day, notably on one of the first services out of Shoeburyness into Fenchurch Street, and then on one of the first evening peak services out of Fenchurch Street back to Shoeburyness. The rest of their time was spent in this depot here, Shoeburyness Carriage Servicing Depot. And 3, in that there were only 6 of them, the rest of the fleet being 357 trains, which we're seeing to the right. Anyways guys, that's it, and welcome to Shoeburyness.
We are now approaching Shoeburyness.
One thing I'm realising as I'm arriving into Shoeburyness is that I forgot to mention what exactly is replacing the Class 387s. Well, C2C have 12 5-carriage Class 720 Aventra units on order from Alstom, which will operate principally in 10-carriage formations, and I can imagine they'll be used on similar workings to the 387s. Well, anyways, welcome to Shoeburyness, and with that, I would like to thank you so much for coming along with me on this ride today. If you did enjoy the video, please do give it a like, as well as share it, as that really does help the channel to grow. If you did enjoy this video and want to see more content such as this, why not consider subscribing to the channel, as well as enabling notifications, as I'm now uploading new videos every Friday at 5 PM. Before our unit heads back into the depot, we can see it next to a Class 357 unit to the right, with the Class 387 unit on the left being an evolution of the Class 357 design. And the Class 387 is the last ever Electrostar to have been built at Derby Works, with the Class 357 being the first. And with our unit heading into the depot for the weekend, it's now time for me to go to the beach and have a bit of relaxation before I head back to London. So, on that note, take care guys, stay safe, and I will see you next Friday at 5 PM. Goodbye.